Our next guest was our NHL Draft Insider for a second straight year from Elite Prospects, their Director of Film Scouting, our buddy from Vancouver Island, Mr. Cam Robinson, back with Sekeres and Price. How you doing, fella?
I'm doing well, boys. How are you doing?
Very well.
Very, very well. Before we get to the juniors and the prospects in your area of expertise, hey, JT Miller's still a Vancouver Canuck, and if he is in training camp, then people are going to say, okay, is this a playoff team? What do you think? Shore up the right side, add PK Subban? How much does he got left?
Not much. I mean, he's got something left in the right situation, but he's not really at all what Vancouver needs on the right side, right? They need someone who can actually play defense. So I would say no, I guess, if you threw $1 million at him as a flyer to add some veteran depth sort of thing, that could be okay. It would make a lot more sense if they didn't have Tyler Myers on the roster. Then it'd be a little more interesting, but I'd say I'd pass if it was me making the shot.
Before we leave the topic, are you surprised how he dropped off a cliff in his career from 59 points down to 31 points, and that was the best he's been? He's had 18, 19, and 22 points respectively the last 3 seasons.
Yeah, it is a little surprising, but at the same time, like just these highly athletic guys that rely on that speed and that acceleration and kind of that quickness and stuff. It's kind of like netminders too, that really, really are reliant on that quickness, that sometimes it goes away earlier than you expect. Versus the more cerebral, intelligent defenders that, don't need to be the most fleet of foot. They can just use their stick and use their body and use their mind to make plays. They can last a little bit longer. Same with the net, same with the forward. So in that sense, it's not all that surprising, but it was quite the cliff that he fell off of. So
what do you see?
I didn't see that happening.
What do you see in edge work as people age, do you think? Like, I'm just projecting now into Quinn Hughes, and not that the Canucks fans need to worry about that for a decade, but, Quinn Hughes at 31, is he going to be anything close to what he is in his mid-20s?
I'd like to think so, because he's also very, very intelligent out there too. But, he is heavily reliant on his skating. And so if there's a knee injury or a hip injury or something like that could slow him down, that would impact his game substantially at his size for sure. So I think if he can avoid injury, that his style of play should last well into his 30s too, especially if he can continue to avoid taking punishment. But yeah, as long as the legs are moving, that I think he's still going to be a highly impactful player into his 30s.
Let's move on to the World Junior Hockey Championships and the 3 Vancouver Canucks prospects who are there. And look, a couple of them played yesterday. Jonathan Lacarimaki is the headliner, the 15th overall pick this year. Their first rounder, a winger from Sweden. What will you be looking for from Lacarimaki in this tournament, Cam? Like, what would be successful for Lacarimaki? Granted that he is pretty young on what is a pretty good team there with Trey Kroners.
Yeah, I mean, I'm expecting some pretty big things from him because of the situation that he's going to be placed into. So, in my mind, he's kind of replacing Alexander Holtz, the Devils' top prospect there, who's just an amazing finisher, a really smart offensive player. And that's kind of where Lacarimaki is stepping in. So, he's playing on the second line with Theodor Niederbach, who's a Red Wings second rounder, who's a really shifty, smart playmaking center. And then the other side, it's Oscar Olausson, who's a Colorado first rounder. So, it's a highly skilled second line. He's getting first power play minutes. He should be the trigger man on that first unit power play. On a team like Sweden that will have to score by committee a little bit because they don't have any standout stars up front. I'm expecting Lacarimaki to be one of those guys that really contributes offensively. And, they end up playing 7 games. I'd hope he scores 4 or 5 goals and puts up near a point a game. I think that's what should be expected of him. And that'll be excellent building up into the January tournament, the 2023 version of that, where he will be leaned on heavily, probably moved up into that first line role. But, as it stands right now, like, he's going to be looked at to be a big contributor for this team. And if he can do that, that's going to help the Swedes. And if he can't, that's going to be a big hit to them.
Is there a potential for the players that are able to play in both of these tournaments, like Lacarimaki, for this to be a better developmental tool? I sort of downplayed, performance at the World Juniors in my editorial yesterday, but for this particular small niche class that get to play this tournament twice in 7 months, can it actually be a bit of a bigger developmental tool than it's been in the past, that you get to play in these high pressure, best on best situations a couple of times in a short span?
I mean, absolutely. Is that it's funny with these tournaments, it's kind of flipped back and forth where before it was always, someone would step up in a big way and, teams would fawn over it and fans would fawn over it and everyone would be like, okay, pump the brakes. It's 5 or 6 games in the middle of the season. Like, let's take the whole sample size. But at the same time, like, you want your players to step up in those big moments, those high pressure situations on the world stage against the best in their age group or, a level above them too. So I think there's a ton of merit in that. And, you want experience playing in big games. You want your players to have that. So when they get to the NHL, they're not shook when they step into their first playoff game. So absolutely, I think this is a great opportunity for him. And then again, when he, especially because he's not playing down the lineup, he's not a fourth line winger, he's just getting his feet wet. He's stepping into a top 6 first power play role. And then that's only going to help him further in the next one. So no, I think this will be really good. And it's interesting because it's going to be sloppy hockey. And, I had the first period on there, the first couple minutes, and it was definitely sloppy hockey in that Sweden game to start out. And it's the middle of August and guys are going to take a bit. But it's really going to jumpstart his season, I think, too, because by the time they get into the medal rounds, everyone's going to be clicking at all cylinders. And that's going to help him just leap right into his SHL season.
There was a little bit debate of how much Lacarimaki plays on the inside. I think people think, yes, he does go there somewhat. I think Patrick Alvin mentioned after drafting him, he's going to have to do more of that at the NHL level. Is this tournament a litmus test for that, or because it's his age group, because it's international hockey, it's not going to really give us a telltale on whether or not he's willing to go to the grind areas that he'll need to in the NHL?
Yeah, I mean, they're playing on the North American sheet. He's going to get a swing against the Americans here. He's going to probably end up matching up against the Canadians or the Finns for a minute or both. They're going to be teams that are going to be defending the inside. They're going to be physical against him. So I think this is a good opportunity for him to show that on a small ice surface, he can get into the middle of the ice and he can bang and he can handle that kind of rough stuff and still get his shot off, still make plays. In the last tune-up game, he scored a nice goal. Niederbach made a nice play and got it to him in the middle of the ice. He made a shifty little move and finished it right down Broadway. So that's the kind of stuff we're going to want to see. I still think that this is a player that, I know Patrick Alvin compared him to kind of Lucas Raymond light. I think that's a pretty generous comparison. Not to say he can't get there, but I think he's going to need a playmaker with him, someone to kind of make that first move, and then he can use his intelligence to get into that soft spot, get the puck, and then finish it, because the kid has a very, very good release.
He started on Finland's middle pair last night, Yoni Irmo, the 3rd-round pick in the 2020 entry draft. It did not go well from there. Tell us about Yoni Irmo and what a good tournament for him would look like.
I mean, him even being there, I think, is a success at this point, because this is a guy who's basically like blackballed from the junior national teams the last several years. Like, I think he played at a U16 event 100 years ago and then wasn't even invited to camps. I don't know what the backstory is for that, because it's not like the Finns have a bevy of elite blue liners. Like, he was getting passed over by guys that were undrafted. It was kind of a head scratcher. So I was even surprised that he got invited to the camp this year, and then even more surprised that he broke camp with the club. It kind of looked like he was going to be in there battling to be, the number 7 guy. And then in the pre-tournament warm-up games, he was getting second pair duties and he was looking okay. And then, he started the tournament yesterday on the second pair and just quickly looked, it was over his head. He said after the game that he was just trying to do too much. He was too amped up and he was making mistakes. And then, he got stapled to the bench. I think he ended up playing 9 or 10 minutes. But you could see the flashes, right? He's very, very big. He's very, very mobile. He can get into scoring positions. I think he had 3 or 4 shots too. None all that, dangerous, but he still had some opportunities. So if he can simplify his game and make smart decisions, that would make all the difference, because those decision-making issues have plagued him throughout his junior years, into the league a little bit. And now, coming into the international game, is that it's hard to teach that hockey IQ, that awareness on the ice. And it's something that he desperately needs to do, because as a physical profile, this is a guy who should have NHL upside. But until he can make smarter decisions with the puck, until he can defend the rush with intelligence and gap up properly, then he still remains a long shot, I'd say.
Jacob Truscott was a 5th-rounder in 2020. He also started on a middle pair for Team USA yesterday. He's a University of Michigan guy where he's played a lot with Luke Hughes, Quinn Hughes' brother. So 2-part question, same as with the other two. What would a good tournament look like for Jacob Truscott? And is he a more difficult evaluation, Cam, given that he's playing with such a dynamic partner in club hockey in Luke Hughes?
Yeah, it's easy to. Well, I mean, at the same time, like Luke Hughes is basically a forward out there, right? So they've got Hughes linked up with Brock Faber, who's just an excellent defenseman on both sides of the puck, but mostly defensively. So he's gonna be back there to cover up for all of Luke Hughes's rushes. And that's kind of Truscott's job at Michigan, and that can be a little dicey because Truscott's not at that level. So he's playing on the second pair with Wyatt Kaiser at this event, or he has so far. I'm a big fan of Wyatt Kaiser. He's a really nice two-way defenseman. So I think honestly, like a good tournament for Jacob Truscott is if you don't really notice him. If he just makes smart plays, if he can defend the rush well, if he can be in zone and use his stick and be a little physical and make smart outlet passes, he shouldn't be racking up too many points. He won't have that many opportunities, maybe a couple of assists here and there. But yeah, if he can just hold down the fort, make smart plays, and that could be a really nice second pair for the Americans because Wyatt Kaiser is so talented, that if Truscott can just be out there with him and hang with him and just chew up, 15, 16, 17 minutes a night, I think that'll be really good for him and for the Americans.
Speaking of Luke Hughes, we came across this in hashtags that he's now outscored both of his brothers in this tournament because good little trivia tidbit is Jack Hughes only ever played 4 games at the tournament and 14 games at the tournament. Quinn never able to ripple twine, only assists on his ledger. But given Luke's profile right now, what do you project for Luke Hughes at this stage based on what you've seen?
At the event?
No, just overall, just as a player. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, myself personally and kind of the group at EP Ringside, we were a little bit lower on him because of, you want your defensemen to play defense sometimes too. There's no questioning that he is a very, very talented offensive player. I think he scored 17 goals and nearly a point a game as a freshman at Michigan this year in 40 odd games. Those are incredible numbers. He ended up in the top 10 in Hobie Baker voting. Really, really great season. I think that he is going to need support once he's in the NHL. He's going to need a guy like Brock Faber on his hip so that when he goes and he makes mistakes and he goes on those rushes, there's someone to clean up those mistakes for him. I think I think older brother Quinn is a better two-way player. But there's a chance that Luke is the better pure offensive player because he's going to be doing it at 6'2", 6'3". He's nearly as mobile and he has a better shot. So it's really going to be interesting in fantasy hockey circles. The sky's the limit for Luke Hughes. In real life context, he still has a lot of cleaning up to do on the defensive side of things, and he's going to be exposed at the NHL level early on, and that's just a given. How quickly he can figure that out will kind of tell how far he can go, if he can be a true number 1 defenseman or if he's going to be more of these sheltered number 2 guys who's going to put up a ton of points, but you don't want to be putting him out there in a defensive zone draw.
Cam, the Canucks have drafted a heck of a lot of Swedes here over the last couple of years. Elias Pettersson, of course, the defenseman from this past draft, but then the 2 defensemen, Mirenberg and Gabrielson, and the forward Forsell, who played really well actually last year from the 2021 entry draft. None of them are with this particular team, Sweden, but they factor to be at the December, or some of them have factored to be at the December version of the World Juniors. Just take us through whether you're disappointed any of those other Swedish prospects didn't make this team and where you see them in December for the next World Juniors.
Yeah, I didn't expect any of them to be there, even with some of these players opting out of this event. Especially Elias Pettersson. He's just recently drafted. It's really, really difficult for someone of his skill set to crack a lineup like that. But he does have an interesting skill set that usually a World Junior team might bring along for the ride because he's so strong defensively and he can step up and play physical against the Canadians. So I think he has a good chance of making that club for the 2023 version here coming up in December, January. Forsell too, like you said, he had a really strong draft +1 season. And Meinberg's a sneaky one. I wasn't at developmental camp, but I heard he was excellent there for the Canucks at that camp and stood out on a daily basis. Rangy, 6'2", 6'3". Has good skills with the puck too, and kind of plays a two-way game. So I think all 3 of them have a shot to make the club. It wouldn't shock me if all 3 were there, depending on how many players choose to make the NHL and don't get sent back, or however it shakes out. So it'll be really good if the Canucks can have a couple Swedes anyways there, with Lacarimaki obviously will be back too. So that tournament could be exciting for Canucks fans watching the Swedes.
Lastly, partner, I've just returned from Prince George, where the town is abuzz. They think they got a pretty good club there. They're not often competitive in the WHL, but maybe a couple first-round picks in next year's draft. And part of the optimism is because they have two fantastic goaltenders. They're figuring they're going to probably trade one. Tyler Brennan was a draft pick of the New Jersey Devils, and then the Canucks went and drafted their backup goaltender, Tai Young, this year in the 5th round. Would you sweat it if Tai Young had to play a backup role for another year in the Dub behind Brennan, or would that be A-okay in terms of his development?
I mean, you want your goalies to play a ton at this age. So it would be ideal if he either got the starts in PG or got moved elsewhere to get starts, even if it was on a rebuilding club like, I don't know, like the Victoria Royals or something like that. But so that would be definitely beneficial for him if they moved out Brennan and he could get the majority of starts. But he's an interesting guy because he's so young, right? Like I think he was less than a week away from being eligible for this 2023 crop. So He was pretty good down the stretch, and we've got one of our scouts, Daniel G, is in Prince George, and he goes to, I think he probably went to like 35 or 40 of their games, and I talked to him about him, and he said he was really good down the stretch, and even when the numbers weren't popping off for him, that was the team kind of hanging him out to dry a little bit, and he was still holding it down and keeping it around a 900 save percentage. So he liked them. Obviously, Ian Clark likes him. Whenever the Canucks draft a goaltender, you got to assume that that's got that stamp of approval. I tend to trust the guys who know goaltenders or have watched them a ton. And so, I've gotten some pretty decent reviews. And if Ian Clark likes them, then I think there's upside there. But yes, you definitely want him playing a ton of games. It would be ideal if he played, 40 or 50 games at least next season and then continues to build on that as he's 18, 19-year-old.
Yeah, he played some in the AJHL with the Calgary Canucks and was 4 days shy of being eligible for this next upcoming
Speaking
draft.
of the BC WHL teams, we talked to Ron Toigo last week in President's Week. We talked to him about the Conor Bedard show going through Western Canada. First of all, your own comments on that and on how much people should bend over backwards to see Bedard this year in the BC division. Secondly, anybody else? Is there any other appointment viewing? Any other visiting team that people are near a WHL arena should be looking out for?
I mean, if Conor Bedard show it is definitely worth the price of admission. I've already circled that on the calendar for when he comes to Victoria and Vancouver is that I'll be getting over to at least one of those games. I was supposed to be at the Holinka and the World Juniors this summer, and then COVID kind of stripped us away. So I ended up skipping out of both those. So I was disappointed to miss out seeing him this summer. But no, he's an electric talent that if you can get an opportunity to see him when he's still playing junior hockey, he's going to put on a show because this will be his last season playing junior hockey. But then, the West is the best this year. Like, it's been a while since we've been able to say that, but there is a number of high impact players that are playing in the Western Hockey League this year. And it starts with Conor Bedard, but, Braden Yager, who's playing for Moose Jaw, like they're going to be a good team too. This kid, he's going to be good. Like he could score 45, 50 goals this season too. He's going to push for that number 3, number 4 spot in the draft. We mentioned Riley Height playing in Prince George there too. Cristal put up over a point a game last year. There's a ton of really talented players playing in the West this year. So exciting times for people out on the coast here. If you want to go see some junior hockey, there's definitely some players that are going to go high in the draft and, have kind of that star level talent potential at the NHL level as well.
Absolutely. No, it's a banner crop from the WHL. Great to hear your voice again, my friend. Be well over there on the island. We'll catch up soon.
Appreciate it. Thanks, boys.
Cam Robinson, Director of Film Scouting for EP Elite Prospects and our NHL Draft Insider.